Hey folks, this is a multi-part video. You're looking at part 3. For part 1 and part 2, click on the links in the show notes below. There's definitely one more special PDF that we need to cover today because it's getting more and more important everywhere, and that is PDF UA.
Yes, well, PDF UA stands, or UA stands for Universal Accessibility, and we already touched the use case a little bit. So again, it comes from not just from regulation standpoint of view, but also from good practices. Whatever you are creating, whatever content you are creating, you have to be sure that the content is accessible for everybody, for people with disabilities, for people who are not able to actually read. And standard PDF doesn't or could have certain problems if you just scan a PDF and don't add text layer, then obviously blind person wouldn't be able to access any information other than there is just an image. When we're talking about accessing this information, so you have to realize that these people with the disabilities and are using some special devices to access, like screen readers and braille keyboards and stuff like that. But it's not only about them, to be honest. It's more. The PDF UA is about being able to have the data in a document in an interoperable manner. So if a blind person is able to access the content, then you can be sure that even an machine AI system would be able equally access the data. So nothing is hidden there, everything is accessible. And right now with AI systems, reading your or scanning your, well, scanning, that's a lousy word, going through your document and doing suggestions, so you don't have to read the whole contract, only a summary that some system would give you. If those informations are not in the right way in a PDF, then you might get a false feelings, or you might trick those AI systems. So it's not only about accessibility for people with disabilities, it's also about automated systems, about AIs, about interoperability, about accessing the content equally for not everybody, for anyone, anything, whoever wants to access the content.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I guess the question is, why isn't PDF doing it from the get-go, or what is missing, right? And I want to lead you to talk a little bit about the concept of tagging and why that is not originally there in PDF.
Yeah, well, again, it comes with the evolution of PDF. At the beginning, we were talking about the digital copy of the paper. And if you have a paper or document in a paper format in front of yourself, you don't have links, you don't have you don't see whatever is a table. You have to actually put both papers together to see that table actually spans 2 pages, stuff like that. So by nature, PDF doesn't carry this type of information. It wasn't meant to be, and we added these capabilities only after we saw the need from outside, from the industries. And so we are, or the way how these documents are prepared, actually there is another layer called tag or structure tree that points into a content, and that adds the additional information that is at the moment missing. So if you have a document that does have a heading, you as a sighted user are able to spot it because it does have like a larger font used, or it's in bold or something. But this information is hidden for the people who don't see it. That's why you are adding some additional information in a form of structure tree. You are tagging the document. You are providing the structure and additional information to that content.
Yeah, I guess the initial thought of PDF as a portable document format was it should, the visual appearance, the whole document should look the same on every computer, right? That was the old days. And that's where PDF was done, right? And it was about how to, quote unquote, paint the page, right? It was not about how to consume the text or the document. So painting the text, it doesn't really matter. You will, as a non-visually impaired person, you'll see it is big, it is bold, it is a headline, right? And from painting the page, you just need to know it's big and bold, right? But from consuming the text, you need to understand the structure, and the structure hasn't been there originally in PDF. Was only added later in, what was it? PDF 1.4, I guess.
1.4, yes.
Introduced the concept of
tagging,
giving it a structure and marking up. You said you tag the document. What you really do is you apply a specific tag to all the elements on the page, and thus can put them in context or perspective and say it's headline 1, headline 2, right? Or giving it a reading order, like start reading here, that column, and then that column, and that column, which is completely irrelevant if you just want to print a page or render a page on a screen or something like that, and looking the same all the time rather than consuming it. But again, if you don't see it, or if you're a machine or something like that, you need the structure.
Yes. And not just structure. While we are tagging the document, you can actually describe more sophisticated connections. Let's say you have a table, and the table does have a certain amount of rows and certain amount of columns. And if you are in a specific column, and let's say the table is large, and you click on that column, you in a specific cell, for example, and the cell might have an information about in which column it is, in which column, which row it is, what is the header of or heading of that column, what is the heading of that row. So in a certain specific place, certain specific cell in a table, you can actually access very quickly the information about the column heading, for example. So it's more about giving or assigning a meaning to the data in a content or on a page.
Yeah. And that is important for consuming the content of it, for instance, for screen readers or something like that, where it was originally intended for. It also has a concept of defining what kind of thing is to understand that things are the net content of the document versus just an artifact. For instance, the page numbering that doesn't have to be read again and again and again on every page because it doesn't deliver value to those who are, for instance, consuming the document as a visual impaired person or something like that. Reading order you mentioned, and things like that. Now before we talk about how we achieve that, maybe where are we with it? I guess other than most of the substandards we discussed today being already updated and based on PDF 2.0, there's an update pending for PDF UA. It's still based on, what is it? We have the latest PDF UA, still PDF UA 1 in the 2016 revision, and that is still PDF 1.7, I guess, right? Or ISO 32001, right?
ISO 30001, yes, yeah. That's right, and that's the only substandard that hasn't been updated yet. We are working on it, heavily working on it. There are obstacles.
Will we have it after the May ISO meetings or even later?
Well, I guess Well, I'm still losing track of the ISO processes here. So whenever we prepare a document, it has to go into a ballot with ISO, and it takes some time to actually be approved. We are not balloting the document now. We are still working on it within the working groups. So even if we are very quick and we would bring it to May ISO meeting as a final format, it would take some time while the document is published.
Okay, so I put a URL on screen here that is a deep link into the PDF Association's website, and that is defining on, or there's a summary on what is worked on currently at the ISO and what is the current status of one of all these standards we covered today. So that should be a good information for everyone here. And when I go to that resource, it says it's in CD level, which means it's committee draft. And there is a ballot that should close before the May meetings on that CD level. But then it takes some more to get a international standard published, right? Okay. Okay, so that's where we are. Work in progress, update in progress, but that is like daily business, right? That's how things are.
Exactly.
So,
something comes up.
So talking about universal accessibility a little more, there's another ISO standard that is always mentioned in context with that, and that is WCAG or WCAG 2.0, describing principles for mostly web content, how you should treat it to be universally accessibility. It has this rule sets. Want to talk about that a little bit and how it's related to PDF UA?
Yeah, well, WCAG isn't standard that's under the development of a PDF association. It's aiming to HTML developers, so websites and portals and stuff like that. However, it contains a section about PDF. This section is pretty outdated, and it only kind of describes how you should create a PDF from an end user perspective. So click here, click there, with this tool, do this, and then magically your file will be accessible. Yeah. And we recognize this, or we realize this is a kind of like a false message for end users or for readers of the WCAG. And we also started at the PDF Association level some work where we formed a working group that is actually preparing some canonical examples how certain structures should be used in a PDF to serve the need of accessibility. And we hope that this work will turn out into a set of rules that will be published within the WCAG. So that's also work in progress. I guess that would be a very good addition for users and developers and whoever wants to adopt the universal accessible principles into PDF. And daily business, we did a lot and still a lot is in front of us.
Yeah, of course. So the PDF UA substandard to me is by its nature, like when you look into the document, the specification itself, it's a little different than the other standards are. It has some of the common used quote unquote PDF language in there. So for instance, like the paragraphs about font embedding being required and Unicode being mandated and stuff like that. But it also has this soft criteria, I'm almost saying not code language kind of like parts in there that is more about the semantics. So for instance, the tags have to match the content. If you're saying you use H1, which is headline 1, it has to be headline 1. If it's headline 2, you got to use H2. And that is a simple example for what it means. On the other hand, that is obviously something that is very hard to check by software or to automate, right? So when is a document well tagged based on the specification we have there? I guess it's from it, again, taking user perspective, now, when you have a document that is already there and you now want to make it accessible, applying the rules of PDF UA, that is a much harder job than creating an accessible document while creating the document, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that all actually depends on author's intent, right? So whenever you are creating a document, you know exactly what message you want to send out. Is this a heading for you or not? What why are you writing the table the way you are designing it? And so you are the author, you know what message you want to send out. You know what labels or how you structure your documents and stuff like that. That's why you are doing these decisions. And if you're doing these decisions based on your best knowledge, then you're good.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you come to a PDF that is not tagged and you wanna tag it, then you have to actually become the author of the document, even though you didn't write it. You have to wear his shoes, so to speak, and try to understand what, why, and how they wanted to express. And that's why the even for readers of the standards, it's sometimes hard to understand. Now, what should I do? I don't know. What would author do? That's the right answer always.
Yeah.
So you have to make your best effort to make the document accessible. You have to make your best effort to describe the content in a way you see it in your head when you're an author. And that's basically the message the standard wants to actually give you. Use the most appropriate semantic for describing some part of the content.
Yeah. So it's not a patch that you can like a second thought, an afterthought or something like that. If you want to go accessible with your document, or by the way, if you have to, by the law, in many cases, have your documents accessible, you better think about the whole authoring and editing process, right? And add the concept of accessibility from the get-go. To drill it down a little bit, so if you, again, use your word processor, software to create a document, then you should not make it big and bold, but rather use the format template of headline, right? Headline 1, headline 2, and so on. And then automatically you have that tags. And if you have a good PDF creation or conversion engine, it will use that original information and rescue it over the conversion process into the PDF. And all of a sudden, a very base level, but a sound and solid level of accessibility, quote, and in other words, tagging is already done when you do it at that point. If it's not done and you have an existing document, well, then you need to have either a service bureau that does that by hand for you. So when you have a very valuable document or a limited number of documents, or a very high demanding document or something like that, and it's not accessible, you got to make it accessible. And there's people sitting there in service bureaus doing it for you. And it is sometimes, for instance, another example is if you have an image in there to make it accessible, you need an alternative text, right? If you haven't added it in the very beginning, then it's obviously very difficult for a machine to say, at this point, there is an image that shows this and this and this and this. There is some software for that. And when it comes to structuring, Foxit also has its LR engine, the layout recognition engine, using machine learning and AI technology to quote unquote re-engineer what was lost during the conversion or what was not put in the document from the get-go. So I guess it's a much better idea to look at PDF UA and generally speaking at accessible document, looking at the whole process rather than seeing it as an afterthought and a patch that you can apply later on to fix things, because it's much harder and the quality is lower, right?
Yes, absolutely. But
So,
there are
yeah,
some use cases as well where you actually have to go through that, some archival materials that are on paper right now. So you have
yeah.
to scan it and you have to provide the information that is in there. Someone has to do it. But that's being done on really valuable documents, as you mentioned.
Yeah, by hand, or other than that,
Right.
AI technologies are applied to do the best they can to give as much structure as possible. In some cases, it's good enough. In some cases, it's not, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so as I said, the specification is a little different. It's not PDF language completely, but it's partially also rules, checkpoints, let's say, to say, if you want to make your document accessible, you should apply this and this rule. For instance, UA mandates that your headline hierarchy is in order, right? Maybe that is something a machine could still check, but it can't check whether it's tagged correctly, right? That is definitely something that a person would have to check. There's Matterhorn protocol, probably is about whether or not a document is well tagged. It's done by PDF Association. If I remember correctly, it's 136 rules in there, or checkpoints, to say, if you follow these rules, then your PDF is most likely PDF UA compliant, or let's say accessible. But again, there's a whole lot of these rules that are not checkable by machines because it's semantic, right?
Yes. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. But funny thing is that Matterhorn protocol, as you said, it's a set of rules. So someone would actually can go through documents and check, I pass. And one would say that accessibility isn't a big thing. It's a lot of work, and people don't want to do it. However, the Matterhorn protocol is one of the most downloaded files from PDF Association websites, so people care.
Yeah, many people have to care, right? It's just the law. In the European Union, it is the law, and most people don't even know that it is. If you publish documents on the internet, they have to be accessible. For instance, a bank or something like that, you got to do it, right? And in the US, same thing. And therefore, more and more organizations concern themselves with accessibility, and no wonder that Matterhorn protocol is looked into. It's this rule set that helps you checking UA compliance of your files. And again, take a look at accessibility as a holistic approach, and not just as a patch afterthought. That is, I guess, the main recommendation. Okay. There's a definition of a conforming reader in UA. What does that mean?
Yeah. So as soon as you enter the data into PDF in a form of structure, in a form of structure elements, you also have to understand that the processor have to provide those data to screen readers and other accessible devices there. And that means a little different processing of PDF. As you mentioned, standard processor would just paint things on a canvas. They appear in PDF and in a content somehow. So for purposes of accessibility, you have to follow the order in which the content appears from a structure tree perspective. And that is a little different to what you do when you are rendering or painting the PDF on canvas. And you have to also provide additional informations to the screen readers or to the outside world that is written in some sort of attributes or structure elements or other data containers in PDF. So that's what the reader has to do for you, has to be able to do that. Because without that, even the well-tagged PDF file wouldn't be accessible.
Yeah, correct. A screen reader potentially just has one line, right? And then the conforming reader would have to forward the content of the PDF file to something like assistive technology, in the right order. My example is always you have a text in 3 columns. And it doesn't make sense to read the first line of all 3 columns first and then the second line of all 3 columns. You got to read it in columns, right? And therefore also a conforming reader has to forward it in the right order to an assistive technology, for instance, a screen reader or something like that. Yeah, okay, so that's a good idea. Now, software can check to an extent whether it's accessible or not, that file. So when we take a look at Foxit's PDF editor, Phantom PDF, there's a checker in there giving you a little bit of a report on at least the machine checkable parts. And also reporting back when there's something missing and providing fix-ups. And then there's an open source, or is it free? I don't know whether it's open source, the PDF accessibility checker as a third-party tool that helps you check against the machine checkable or readable rules. Is it open source, do you know, or is it just?
Well, no, it's a free, the source isn't open. So you can go to a web page and download it and use it in your environment for free, of course, but you can't really change the source of it. And yeah, it's there are validators, of course. One of them is in Foxit itself, and it guides you through some of the things you might improve on a document, which is a great thing and which is very important help. However, not everything is doable automatically, and there are some things that even a checker cannot really do, and some are strange and you wouldn't expect you to do so, like contrast checker, for example. It's not for blind people, but it's for people like myself who I'm wearing glasses, I can't really read, and it's getting worse and worse. So yeah,
Is it? Yeah.
So certain contrasts and certain usage of colors isn't helping me to understand the content, basically.
Sure. Okay. Okay. One more concept, and that might be even more complicated, but I guess it's also a good wrap up for discussing the different parts of the standard, is the topic of a PDF file being both archivable and accessible. So I guess I just want to mention that you can definitely create a PDF file that is both compliant to PDF-A and to PDF-UA at the same moment, right? So that is the gold standard, but should be daily practice, more or less.
It should be daily practice, I would say, yes. If you were asking me, I would say file by default in a PDF-A and UA compliant, because that's what is a good thing, obviously. And yeah, the concept of having archival document as well as accessible document is pretty old. We were talking about that while we were discussing the PDF-A files. And PDF-A2 small a was meant to be accessible as well as supposed to be for archiving purposes. However, we didn't do the job very well back then, because we didn't the constraints, or
it had tags, but it did ignore all the other aspects of accessibility.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why actually we had to create something different, and that was the PDF-UA standard in 2012, I guess. So yes, I definitely agree that there could be a file that is both PDF-A and UA compliant, but for some burdens when creating the files, people don't usually do it, because when you're creating a file for archiving purposes, you don't really care about the time, or you don't want to spend time by let's say Word, for example, Microsoft Word, for example, word processor. You don't want to use the styling things there, because that takes time. headings. You don't want to describe tables properly because that takes a lot of time. You don't want to apply alternates to image. That takes a lot of time. So that's why you take your shortcut, do just the PDF-A file, and you're done. Basically, PDF UA file, create a PDF UA file, requires a lot more effort.
Yeah. So by accident, I know that the PDF Association itself is currently working on updating their publishing process so that simple save as PDF actually kicks off a little automated processing so that in the end there is a PDF resulting that is both PDF-A and UA compliant at the moment, lead by example, right? And it's currently updated again with all the new versions, new parts of the standards that came out. And that is something every company out there can definitely mimic. I said it, our contact data is in the end of this podcast. Contact us, we put you in touch with people who actually know how to do it practically. User perspective for PDF UA, look at it, it's the law, right?
Exactly, that's regulations. Some countries, Germany, Canada, European Union, we have to provide content that is accessible.
Yeah.
It's simple as it is.
Yeah.
Everything what you put on a website has to be accessible for everybody. And that's basically it. You don't have to say more about it.
Yeah. Okay, so Roman, I'm ready to wrap this up. Even I get a little bit dizzy now with all these details. I guess for the next episodes, will be more easy listening in the future episodes when we look at use cases and practical implementations of PDF and companies and so on and so on. Nevertheless, if you're still missing something, then talk to us. You have the content information on screen here. I want to say thank you very much to my guest, Roman, here, and to the audience for listening. Thanks, Roman.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, contact me, contact Roman if you want to discuss further, and see you next time in about a month from now. Subscribe to our channel to not miss the latest and greatest in PDF. Thank you.